You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskins, your host as always. I can't believe we're in October already having those conversations about the market with Brendan Ptolemy over the last couple of weeks. We're going to drill down a bit more into something a little more topical, more practical for people on the ground looking to buy right now. And one of the segments we haven't spoken to on this podcast for quite a while, which really needs to be looked at because there's a story there to tell, is the established apartment market across the city, East Perth, Perth, West Perth. And the only man that I would speak to about this topic is a man who's been in a few years ago, who's clearly the expert in this space. It's Richard Self from Mac Hall. How you going, mate?
Good, thank you.
Hey,
Thanks.
It's been too long since you've been on this podcast.
Mate, it's been a number of years.
There's a story, isn't there, to tell in those years?
There is. We've come from a very, very dark place. A few years ago, I remember sitting here with you and we spoke about how such great value the apartments were, particularly, West Perth was there, the inner city Perth. I couldn't have imagined the recovery we've had since then.
Take me back to those days about, I guess, the cheapest one better, two better, three better you sold back in the 2019, 2020 era.
Go right back to the centre of the city and some of the Finbar product got down to 260, 270,000 for a modern one bedroom with full resort amenities, your typical Finbar development. Granted it was 10 years old, that now would be easily in the 400s, mid 400s. Two betters, similar story. They got down to mid 300s, depending on where it was and what it was. And then now they'd easily be mostly all in the 500s and some of the better ones mid fives, and two car bays might see them at 6 and 650.
And it clearly is a lot of value that people have picked up in that time. It was a scary time for people to buy into that. I guess you really had to be good at your job back then when selling the idea of an apartment in the city, when, to be frank, the city of Perth for a number of years there, you wouldn't want to spend a lot of time in there.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, especially down Adelaide Terrace. So most of the city agents that I speak to, and we've come from those really tough times and we did cut our teeth, and you do learn to be a fantastic salesperson and advocate of the city for what's coming and talking up some of the developments and how good this would be to live here and really selling the lifestyle that at times is difficult in Perth in apartments. But finally that's come to fruition and there was excellent value there, and you couldn't replicate the product for anywhere near what we were selling them for. And still, even now today, you can't replicate the apartments that people are buying.
And I guess that's your major selling point right now is that, the building's 10 years old, but the location's fantastic. You're buying it for, I'm assuming, 150, 200 grand less than what it would be sold for off the plan today next door. And that value proposition compared to the off the plan, but also compared to an equivalent unit or villa somewhere down the road for the similar square metre, there's still such a story to be told about that value, isn't there?
For what you get, 80 square metre for a 2x2 in the city, I think to build that property now isn't 100 or 150 more, it's significantly more. And there's one development in West Perth, for instance, where you can buy a 2-bedroom across the road that's 20 years old and it's 75 square metres, and you can buy a brand new one, not complete yet, probably for low 1 millions. That is a huge disconnect between the second-hand and the brand new construction market.
You've mentioned square metres a little bit. Would it be fair to say that a lot of these apartments built 10, 15 years ago actually had a pretty good size compared to what's being offered today? Or would it be that the apartments are actually getting bigger with more amenity internally?
It's that way. So the only apartments that are being built now, it seems like, are the larger owner-occupier product with really high-end finishes and plenty of amenity within the complex and inside the apartment. But now to build the smaller apartments, it just doesn't stack up.
So you're just not seeing a lot of that product come on.
Exactly.
And you're thinking about young person getting in the market, or then comparing to one thing we haven't spoken about, price to rent on a weekly basis. If we're comparing a mortgage to a weekly rent, and we know that most rents have shot up to $650, $700 across most product in that 2-bedroom space within 5Ks of the city, it starts to tell a story to a young person of, hey, maybe I should just own this.
We're starting to see, though, that even first home buyers are being pushed back into a 1-bedroom. So it was only a few years ago, for that sort of money, if you were renting for $300, $400 a week, you could buy that 1-bedroom for $300,000, $320,000. Whereas now that same 1-bedroom's $450,000, so they're just scraping into the market, whereas they could have got a good 2-bedroom before for that. But to go back to your original point, it's cheaper to own than it is to rent right now. So that's one of the main buyer demographics that we're seeing.
I think it is when that reality became apparent to the market that the buying into the apartment space started to become attractive again, because often apartments, they are a product type that people would prefer to rent in. It's a more transient lifestyle. It's an in-between space, a stepping stone for someone moving out of home or working abroad, for example. The second the reality became apparent that, hey, rents have doubled in the last 5 years, the cost of these houses have actually gone down for a lot of that time. I remember moving into an apartment in Northbridge 2017, paying $350 a week for a 2x2, a brand new 2x2, $350 a week. That's now $700 a week. So you can really start to reflect the week-to-week cost proposition is finally just, hey, we should own this thing.
Yeah, exactly. And those same tenants are now our buyers. They're already sold on the area. They're sold on the buildings. They're like, exactly, I think it's time that we buy this. We're feeling a lot of rental pressure. We just want to get a roof over our heads. They've seen all the other property out in the outer suburbs go up. If they were thinking a townhouse or a house, well, they're probably priced out of that now. So they think, well, instead of paying rent, we'll just buy this apartment. And, it's putting further pressure on the buying market.
Over the last couple of years, a big part of Perth's story in the cheaper price point space, which, apartments in this area still fits in that price point clearly, has been the locust swarm of East Coast investors coming in, picking up all the property that's under replacement value, and then eventually pushing that price up, and West Australians waking up to it at some point along the way. Has that been a part of your story in the inner city apartment space too? Have you seen a lot of investors from the East Coast, or even to an extent West Australian investors coming back into the market? Because apartments historically has been an investment product.
Yeah. I hadn't seen buyer's agents in the inner city market really ever at all before. And over the last few years, every year there's a few more deals being done all the time, and especially the cheaper product. So they did see all of a sudden you can come over here and buy a one bedroom for $350,000 that rents for $500 a week.
Yield play is pretty good.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty attractive. And the local investors are finally hopping on board now, and they have been the last sort of 12 to 18 months. And the Eastern States investors were here, just over 2 years ago in the apartments. I mean, they were already super active in the other spaces, from talking to other agents and listening to your podcast. But it did take them a while to come into the city, and you can see that in the amount of turnover that's happening. Turnover's tripled from 3 or 4 years ago, and it's a range of buyers, and the Eastern States buyers are definitely making up a component. I'd say they're slowing down to a little bit. The rents are starting to steady, as you know. They're pretty high. I think the prices have been pushed up, and then the yield isn't quite the same. So they're probably looking further afield now.
So who is it that's the buyer that's taking that place of that early entrant East Coast investor, your 1, 2, 3 better apartments in West Perth and Perth and Crawley?
The one bedroom apartments are still the first home buyers. They've had to really come back into the one bed space, and they've been super popular, and they're still really affordable.
So it's been a compromise?
It has been a compromise, exactly. So they would love their 2x1 that used to be $350, under $400,000. That just doesn't exist anymore. And it just doesn't happen. And if it is, it might be a 60s unrenovated 2x1 in Highgate or something.
Flats.
Flats, exactly. Your typical 2-bedroom buyer is still an investor, first home buyer with some parental assistance, or a first home buyer that never bought over the last 3, 4, 5 years, and they've seen that property go up $150,000, $200,000.
Someone in their 30s probably.
Correct, yeah, living at home, and they finally are buying. They're feeling FOMO still. And, we had one of those in West Perth 2 weeks ago. That property 3, 4 years ago, $415. I sold it to the owner. And here we are at $575,000, bought by a first home buyer.
Should have bought then.
Should have bought then for sure.
Are we seeing a lot of turnover in the 3-better space? Because the interesting information we see out of PropTrack a couple of months ago was that there's a lot more inquiry for 3-better apartments than there are for 1-better apartments.
Yeah, and it's the least amount of stock that we have available.
Yes.
It's the least amount of stock that was built over all those years, because back in the day, 20 years ago, developers were building for investors, not realizing that there would be this huge owner-occupier population wanting to buy. I think they probably made up most buildings. 10% would have been the mix, maybe 20%. But once again, in the western suburbs, the owner-occupier market, they demand larger, higher-end apartments.
So how is the turnover there looking like now? Are you seeing much of it come on, even if it's coming off a small supply base in the first place? I mean, do you have people calling up saying, hey, got any 3-betters on the market? Or are they probably more reserved for the brand new off the plan Blackburn style product that's $1.5 million to $5 million?
No, there's still plenty of inquiry for those 3-betters. Even if you can get something for $600,000 to $800,000, that product just doesn't really exist in large portions in the city anywhere. Take West Perth, for example. There's probably only less than 6 or 7 buildings that have 3-betters in that price range. But the second part that comes with that, it's like, really, do you need a 3-bedroom? no, I really want the second car bay. So
that's a very interesting point, because it's really only the 3-bedders that come with a second car bay.
That's exactly right. Or it's more often. So
Yeah.
So straight away, the second question I ask most people is like, yep, second car bay, that really narrows your search. Are you only fixed on West Perth? Are you looking in Perth, East Perth? And we sort of then really knuckle down into what they're after. And if it's the second car bay is not able to be compromised, it just narrows the search right down.
Tell me about that car bay factor for people listening thinking, I might invest in an apartment. They're still under replacement value. That's important when I want to seek value in buying property. How big is the number of car bays, none versus one versus two, in that value space and resale space?
Yeah, I mean, selling an apartment without a car bay at all is tricky in Perth. It just isn't part of our ethos in Perth almost. You've got a car to get everywhere, even in the centre of the city. So selling without a car bay is tricky. Affects the price probably 100, 150,000, for your typical 2-bedroom.
Wouldn't recommend.
Not recommended. And then with one car bay versus two, people are willing to compromise because once again, the price difference is so great and there just isn't a lot of properties with 2 car bays. So more often than not, they do compromise.
I see some buildings these days where the apartment's got the 1 car bay, but there's a lot of visitor bays. And those visitor bays are full most of the day with the boyfriend, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very hard for strata groups to police that. One of those things, visitor bays we advertise as, a selling feature, but more than likely the tenants are filling them up.
I guess that question talks to the point of, do you have a lot of singles versus couples buying into these properties?
There would be more singles because there's more 1-bedrooms and then does suit the 2-bedroom buyer, I guess. Yeah, because it's got 1 car bay. Again, the couples are looking for townhouses, villas, as an entry point into the market, or a suburb unit that has plenty of street parking.
And then that makes a lot of sense. And probably the number of car bays advertised that directs the inquiry rather than other way around. Let's pull it back a bit if we can. And it's been a while since we've spoken about the suburbs just in general, right? We're speaking about the used apartment market, but I also want to feature West Perth and Perth and East Perth in the conversation. If you can, for those people who don't come into the city much, can you please provide a bit of an outline as to the lifestyle differences? If you're going to choose West Perth over East Perth over Perth, how do you understand which area best suits your lifestyle or your needs?
Exactly. So I always say to people, it depends where you like to come and go from. So West Perth, you might have missed out on something in Subi, or you want to be close to the freeway entrances. You might spend more time at the beach. Kings Park's important to you, the west end of the city. It's a leafier, quieter sort of lifestyle. You go right round to the other side to East Perth, I find it's more people that want to hang out in Vic Park more, do their shopping, East Vic Park, probably frequent the airport a little bit more.
Coming from living in the south of the river previously?
Yeah, possibly. And also the Mount Lawley, Highgate, people that just want that more urban existence. I find with East Perth, it's just a bit more concrete. It's maybe closer to the footy. It's a different buyer. Usually someone that's looking in East Perth isn't looking in West Perth. But the West Perth buyer might buy more down to roughly King Street. And the inner city buyer, it just depends on exactly what location, but generally an investor, not many owner-occupiers looking to live in the centre of the city.
Are the price points reflected in any way in terms of demand and supply at the moment? We know that, for example, East Perth, of all the places, had probably the biggest dearth, the biggest oversupply of apartments, given it probably has the biggest supply base in the first place. How you rank the price points in East Perth for similar product versus Perth versus West Perth?
It's all pretty even at the moment. I would say that the biggest standout has been the amount of turnover. So turnover's tripled over the last few years, and Perth and East Perth are almost in the top 5 weekly sales turnover at REWA. Every week, without fail, one of them features, if not both.
You don't have turnover without demand.
Yeah.
Right? So there could be a huge supply base, which we know there is.
Yep.
Those transactions don't happen unless people are buying them.
Yeah, exactly. But it was more that the price points were so cheap. I mean, that's probably the last suburbs with consistently $300,000 to $500,000 stock every week in, week out. You're not venturing into Yokine or Jundana very often in those price points anymore to pick up a 2-bed unit. That's
right. And it talks to the fact that I think for the most part, people have been avoiding, especially East Perth, for quite a while as an extension of the city of Perth, but also just lacking a bit of amenity. I think with the Watermark development never going ahead, that really I think was going to be a bit of an activity centre for that whole East Perth area, and it's obviously failed them. I think the East Perth Primary School, when it does come on, I think will start to bring back some families and some lifestyle there that has really been lacking in East Perth and only really been evident in that microcosm of the Claysbrook Cove for the last couple of decades. When you think about West Perth, I look to, well, what's happening in West Perth right now, it's probably Subi East that's the most important factor to the upcoming gentrification of West Perth, isn't it? It's not even in West Perth that will have the most impact.
It is being looked at the moment. Some future sellers in West Perth think, oh, gee, what happens when they start to build that out? And I see it as a positive. There'll be more amenity, more cafes, possibly a supermarket.
Yeah, hopefully Woolworths pull the trigger.
Exactly, and that's what West Perth is missing, and hopefully one day that comes, and I think that will be the jewel in the crown for West Perth.
When you think about West Perth, we generally think about Wellington Street, Murray Street, Kings Park, but there's a part of West Perth that we've spoken about before, but most people forget about, and that's pretty much in between the freeway and BD Park swimming pool, Loftus Street, Charles Street. How's life in that part of the world? Because that is a little bit more of an urban lifestyle, isn't it?
It is.
Cafes, and there's a lot happening with the Pickle District. Tractors are out.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of development on their doorstep, which should add to the area. But those character houses, the little gems, the terraces, it's just a quiet little pocket that's forgotten about. You wouldn't even know it's West Perth.
Not that much high rise there, is it? It's a lot more of, there are townhouses. There's that cottage maisonette property type from 100 years ago, as well as some low rise apartments and flats. Yeah,
which is super popular. I mean, all those types of properties are really popular right now, but that development that's happening in the Pickle District will take the density pressure away from that pocket. So hopefully it remains this cute, not heritage precinct, because people get upset by that, but it does have a character fabric to it.
Especially that Pickle District, there's so much history, there's so much of that cultural vibe, there's an arts scene there that is being protected and hopefully amplified by the development. But we're bringing in a Bunnings, bringing in some town centre lifestyle there. I think that's what has been missing in between Fitzgerald Street and Loftus, essentially is a walk score. The second that starts to come in, it actually becomes a really convenient place to live. And that would be one of my picks, is if you're having a look around Cleaver Street, Florence Street, and you can pick up something with a bit of land, not even just an apartment, but a bit of land in that area, I think the lifestyle offering is really going to improve over the next 5 to 10 years in a way that it hasn't been for the last 50 years.
Yeah, agreed. And those types of buyers, they might have upgraded from an apartment, looking for that piece of dirt, that character house, but it also catches part of West Leederville Primary School catchment. So it's almost probably the most affordable entry into West Leederville Primary School.
That's a really good point, and most people wouldn't be thinking about it. When we talk to Craig Gasper, for example, about West Leederville and Subiaco, prices are just phenomenal there these days.
Exactly. And I think, go back to West Perth for a sec, a buyer group that's coming out is really someone used to try and buy into Shenton catchment, is now trying to buy into Bob Hawke catchment. And we're getting the spillover from Subi because there has been a tremendous run on those apartments over near Royd House behind Homebase. That turnover, because it's so fast and furious there, is they're spilling over into West Perth because there's supply. People go, this is actually on the border of Subi. It's not too bad. That's sort of been an emerging trend.
Do you have a lot of people who specifically have said, hey, we're buying in here just so my kid can go there?
Yeah, absolutely. And along with Perth Modern, if they have a gifted child and they don't want to commute every day, they see West Perth as an affordable bolt hole, which is great for the area. And also, the Bob Hawke catchment zone is really starting to gain traction.
Well, I think it's one that's got a very good reputation all the way up to Joondalup. It's quite a big catchment when you think about it.
Huge.
But you're right, the 2 or 3 bedroom apartment is much cheaper than the 3 bedroom townhouse in Subiaco.
Yep, absolutely.
When you think about development, especially in the apartment space, we know on this podcast that not much is stacking up unless the high-end space or your Finbar with their economies of scale. Have you had many apartment sites pop up in West Perth or East Perth over the last couple of years? Have you had many developers knocking on the door saying, hey, I'm having to think, is that available? I know it's off market, but I might start doing the due diligence again?
Not recently. I mean, West Perth, there's a lot of development sites. A lot of those houses aren't heritage listed. That you can usually put together 2 or 3 next to each other. If the developer really wanted to do that, they could, but that's not happening. They're not stacking up right now.
What it means is supply is going to stay constrained then, and it really is those external suburbs that would be the only competition in that space, which means that it has to be West Perth, both north and south of the freeway, that is its own saviour, I guess, in that amenity increase.
That's why Crawley, I think there's been a huge increase in turnover there recently. There's a pocket just on the other side of Kings Park near the Blue House or the Blue Jetty, and those values, they came off 40, 50%. Once again, they are finding a spot in the market where they're big, oversized apartments don't mind they're a little bit older and they're willing to compromise on a location. They're not really walking anywhere, but the views are good. It's peace and quiet, lots of greenery. Still ticks a lot of boxes on paper, close to the city, not even one set of lights to the city.
So we're talking the ones on Mounts Bay Road, essentially, next to the university colleges.
Yeah, exactly. And then up the side streets there, Kings Park Ave, Park Ave.
It's a real enclave, that area, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And we're finding a particular buyer. They're coming from Subi and Nedlands, even City Beach, because they're used to their big, older houses. Again, the equivalent brand new is more than double.
Oh, of course. And we've seen
wait.
a couple of apartment developers try to get ideas up there, and it just doesn't seem like it's happening. They're clearly not getting the off-the-plan buyers, because we're talking some premium dollars here. And I think that's the secret sauce for most apartment developments. If you're going to try and sell the idea of the apartment, you're really not selling the apartment. You're selling everything other than the apartment, the lifestyle, what you bring with it. And if your building isn't big enough to provide all the amenities that an owner, a resident would need, then the local area needs to. And I think that's probably the tough sell in that pocket and Crawley around Kings Park, is
Absolutely.
You're walking a few hundred metres, if not a kilometre, to get to Hampton. Hampton's still not got that much amenity.
Yeah.
And if you want to get down to Broadway and IGA, well, that's a problem. So that whole area in between Hampton and I guess all the way to Christchurch, when we think about the possibility of apartments in the future, it's sort of cart before the horse. We need to start seeing Woolworths and Aldi and these basic amenity providers come in first, but then they're probably not going to invest the money until they see a bit more critical mass in the area. It's a tough sell, isn't it?
It is right now, for sure.
And that's why I think when West Perth, when Subi East comes in, West Perth will benefit massively from Woolworths pulling the trigger on that.
Absolutely. We've always lacked the jewel in the crown, really, just that supermarket. People always ask me, where do you go shopping? Well, in West Perth, on that side of the tracks, you're going to Crossways in Farmer Jack's in Subi. It really is only a 10-minute drive, not even. So
it's probably the only place you can drive into at the moment, given the city not drive up.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's look forward, Richard, if we can, on where prices are at the moment. We know that interest rates are as high as they've been and are probably capped. We know that rates are probably going to drop soon. That tends to impact investor markets as well as first home buyer markets, because it's the people who are most sensitive to cost of holding property. And we know the population keeps cracking on, just ticking over 3 million people right now. A lot of those people start in apartments, come from apartments overseas, not averse to that style of living. Can you give us a bit of a temperature check right now, as the last couple of weeks, what's the vibe been on the ground? How many people are rocking up at the home open? What's the price pressure been? If you're putting it on the market for $550, what's it selling for right now?
Last 2 weeks, we're probably seeing half as much traffic as what we'd get. So we'd get 20 groups or 10 groups at a home open, still get multiple offers and still get above the asking price. In terms of pricing, the from price is used quite often at the moment, and we're seeing anything that was priced from 500 or 520, we're sort of achieving in the mid to high fives for a typical 2-bedroom right now.
So most people are expecting to have to pay about 10% more than the from price.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it's ending up. And then on that, we have just only 2 months ago achieved the highest median sale price ever in West Perth for an apartment. REWA stats would show we're at the highest price ever recorded, which is $562,000.
And that would show that this is the last segment of the market. Most others have cracked that a year and a half, 2 years ago. The last segment of our market, the used apartment market in West Perth, has just finally come back to the median price point 10 years ago.
Yeah, 2013 was the last peak, yeah.
It's really hard to fathom that when you think about other capital cities around Australia, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne. They're probably sitting at apartment prices double what they were 10 years ago in their markets. And we're literally just ticking back to where it was a decade ago. It shows the space, as long as there's the buyer pool, for where it's got to go.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, there's nothing going to be really there to disrupt that. There's not oodles, thousands of apartments coming to change that setup. So unless there's massive job losses or massive change in the economy, just purely based with the lack of supply, prices are only back to what they were at their last peaks, only just getting there now. Turnover's still super high. They're still super affordable. The cost of replication is almost double. I think there's a bit of blue sky there still in the city, and that's Perth, East Perth and West Perth.
And that's why we're featuring it today on the podcast, Richard, because we have a story to tell finally, not only one over the last few years, but I believe one going forward. Simply on a replacement cost theory basis, yields are fine, rents are double what they were 5 years ago, so we're all good there. It's just a basic fact that if you can't justify adding more supply because of the price point in the established market, there's only one way the established market can go as long as demand stays constant or more. That's the conversation we're having today, and I really appreciate you providing a more detailed analysis of where things are at across those price points and markets and where it's going. Number one agent in apartments in all of the inner city, Richard Self. You have been for a long time, you will be for a long time more. Thanks for coming in again, mate.
Mate, thanks for having me. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!